issue, but it seems kind of unrealistic to me because your whole presentation, to me at least, suggested that the veil has all through history represented various kinds of collective identities and been extraordinarily meaningful, not to individuals, so much to groups. And to suggest that we can now make a matter of just an individual choice, every woman should wear whatever she likes, she should be free to do so. I'm certainly not against that as policy, but it doesn't seem to me like there's any way that we can pitch ourselves into a world where the veil is just a matter of individual robing. It has, for all kinds of people, the power to make statements about collectivities.
Sure does.
Otherwise, it doesn't have that kind of power.
Yeah, there's no question. I do think that a lot, at least in places like Afghanistan, there's a lot of imposition of Western individualism, where I think part of what I'm trying to say is, and this is by the way much longer talk generally, so there's more detail in the larger talk, but part of it is that, you know, there's a lot of sort of Western imposition of individualism. You have your Lee Gensler's running around their monologues. And in that context, the assumption is that women have a choice. And many women don't, and they don't even know there's such a thing as a choice out there in rural Afghanistan. It's just part of life, right? And I know that's what you're talking about, but I think, but you know, we approach it as if every woman in the world had a choice, and if they don't not veil, for example, you know, Americans really have been doing this to Afghan women. If you don't not veil, then you must be deeply, deeply oppressed and deeply repressed. And that's simply not the case. Many women simply do choose, regardless of whether it's customary or not. They they have minds and they think and they decide, this is what I'm going to do. You know, does that make sense? Does that even answer your question?
Well, it wasn't even really a question. It was just a comment about it.
That's
seems to
true.
me
It wasn't
that,
a question. Okay.
it seems to me that it's, you know, the final point that you come to sort of takes away the power of the veil. And if it didn't have any power, we wouldn't see this fabulous cascade of images that you moved through, and which was wonderful to look at. So I'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
I actually have something that I think kind of builds on that question, which one of the things that you mentioned that I found really intriguing was this idea of clothing as a sort of a line or almost a membrane between sacred and secular to kind of separate one's sacred self from the secular world. And I was wondering if this is more problematic or loaded in cultures where that separation is less articulated. If you have essentially a religious government as opposed to what at least we ostensibly think we have here, which is separation of, religion and the secular world. But I guess I was just wondering if in cultures where that definition isn't articulated or is not an ideal that is aimed for, does that make it more complicated to create that kind of distinction between sort of those categories? I don't know.
I don't either, and it's infinitely complicated.
Right.
It really is. And this is kind of a Cliff Notes.
Right.
It is. It's infinitely nuanced and it's infinitely complicated. And
As I think your examples pointed out.
Yes, I think so too.
Complexities of
Exactly.
each of those instances. I don't know. I mean, do you feel like there's particular sort of circumstances that cause the hijab, as an example, to be the sort of site of such kind of contention?
Well, I think it is very individualized, so almost like whether it is for protection or for resistance, or I think there's many different responses.
I like that idea of it being protection. You both mentioned that, and I was wondering how exactly exactly does that work? Does that just mean that in some of those cultures, sort of street thugs are less likely to harass you if you're wearing the veil? Is that, I mean, is that some kind of sort of cultural circumstance that causes, someone who's the kind of person who's looking for someone to rape, that he would choose someone who is veiled over not? I mean, what is sort of going on there that would cause simply a sort of, light piece of clothing to provide that kind of security?
Well, in some cases, it's really the triumph of hope over experience. You send your daughter out in a burqa in Cairo, hoping that that burqa will protect her. If she's running around in a hijab and, there's some thug from wherever, the chances a mother might feel, or anyone might feel, that the chances are that she'll be less respected and seen as a loose woman, or whatever. I mean, it's all a chance. You're taking a chance there. And also, resistance, just as a deliberate resistance. I think that the hijab in many ways began to be more popular among young Muslim women as a sign of identity and resistance. As I've said before, I think I've said it 10 times today, Egyptian women my age were not generally wearing hijab. I don't know any. My cousins didn't, nobody. But their daughters almost all do universally, and it began, I think, with, to some extent, and I don't want to put motives to anybody, but I think to some extent it did begin as resistance, and we're bombing Iraq, we're carrying on about Muslims, Europe is full of this kind of almost racism, if not out-and-out racism, and you're going to make a statement. That's a lot of what the hijab has been. I mean, it's so varied. It's really varied.
Yeah, right before the fall of the Bartlett regime in Egypt, there were a number of people at AUC that were working on this, and actually there were a number of studies that came out that did tend to indicate that sexual violence against women on the street went down with the greater coverage that they have, and it's whether you were sort of dressing Western style versus the hijab, or then with the full niqab. And so I think in that sense, some women felt that it was protection, and might have adopted it, or families were recommended that. But then again, after the fall of the, and many had posited, or many of the studies that I had read posited that there was also a masculinity aspect going on, because the Mubarak regime had so completely emasculated most of the population. This was a male, response to that in a very negative way, obviously. But now that we've seen the fall of the Mubarak regime, a little bit more insecurity, that sexual violence has gone down, but street violence in terms of trying to just steal things now has really risen in Egypt, which was something that I have never, ever experienced before this past year. That was the one thing you never had to worry about getting your pocket picked in Egypt or most Middle Eastern countries like you would in London.
And is there a reason that's been attributed to that?
I think it's probably an economic issue, actually. Now people are economically desperate for that reason.
And your descriptions of the economy are, by the way, they're pretty much the same in Afghanistan.
Oh.
The young men can't marry, they don't have any jobs, they don't get money. It's really a mess. It's really sad.
I have a question. It strikes me that if you think about, and this is just based on what Michael said and what I know about news, but if you think about the Egyptian situation, there's a way in which embracing the veil constitutes a form of resistance to Mubarak, and then you have these women who are participating in the revolution sort of make use of the veil as part of their revolutionary effort. At the same time, you have these more conservative Muslim parties, like, is it the Noor? Is that the one that sort of worried people, particularly when it did fairly well, in addition to the Muslim Brotherhood pushing the veil, and it seems to me that you then have from both, at least in some way considered the left, or at least a revolutionary posture, and also from the conservative posture, sort of pushing women or encouraging the embrace of the veil. And so there's that problem. And then I'd like maybe to put that together with the fate of women in the post-revolutionary political situation. My understanding is that women did catastrophically poorly in the elections. And then, in fact, there's a lot of evidence that the role of women in Egyptian society is not going to be expanded, but if anything, contracted in the post-revolutionary situation. So, I mean, is it possible that, that the veil is in a weird way, whoever is embracing it is actually encouraging that, because it's actually functioning as a way of asserting that this kind of separate role for women is in fact appropriate. That's a lot of things, but I wonder if you could comment on that.
Well, I do think that struck me as I mentioned, as I was leaving, I saw women exposing themselves, but the whole idea of wearing the bra outside of your shirt, or just not wearing the hijab. I saw far more hair on women maybe the last 2-3 months I was there than I ever had before. And I think some of that is that response to the transitionary period, because I think many people in Egypt are very dissatisfied with the revolution because they were very targeted, focused on getting Mubarak out. That was seen as the root of the problem. When Mubarak's gone, the sun's going to shine again. And they got Mubarak out of the way, but there's no institutional changes. We saw just last week the Supreme Court, which was entirely put in place under Mubarak, just threw out the court charges for all of the individuals that were involved in the Battle of the Camel. And these hired thugs were brought in to sort of beat down and kill protesters, basically. And they were all acquitted across the board. And so that brought people back out into the streets, of course, to demonstrate against that. But I think that's one indication whether you're looking at the court system. The military is still very much in power. They own enormous amounts of property. They don't seem like they have a lot of say in day-to-day politics, but they're still on all of the presidential councils and everything. And so many people will sort of believe that sort of behind-the-scenes staff is still doing their thing. And so I think that's left a lot of people in Egypt in the situation of how do we proceed at this point? And I think very much questioning which angle you say, as you say, from more the left or the conservative aspect, how are we going to deal with that? And I think the problem for women is, of course, in a post-monarchical world, women, you are the symbol of the nation. Right? You get to sort of torture those symbols and all sorts of, until we find a sort of stable situation, and in Egypt, it's very, very traditionally women have been the image of the nation, but not one that's fixed, not like Lady Liberty or Marianne or something in the Western experience. Women are often depicted as sort of tortured or bound up peasant women at the hands of the military, or a young girl to be wooed by a leftist party or a politician, if you will, or a pretty young woman to be sort of wooed by John Bull, or maybe now the United States, Uncle Sam, or something like that. So women take on a varied image symbolizing Egypt.
Friends of mine were very surprised that women were working for and campaigning for the Brotherhood and for the New York Army. And it kind of goes to your statement. Why are they doing that? But because the idea is that they'll only be further oppressed. But indeed, why are they doing that? There are good reasons, probably.
Question, Mr. Chairman, based on what we're talking about here, about how the meaning of the veil is so
culture and get in flux because of the changing from generation to generation within just one culture. Did you find that then such a challenge when it came to putting together your exhibition as to how you were going to give it some sort of definition when it is so entrenched in individual cultures? I mean, did you feel like you kind of give an overview of the various meanings, or did you find sometimes did you ever get frustrated, like, uh-oh, maybe I should be taking it in a different direction? Because I love
Well,
that
you know, the book that I did earlier, the show is sort of based on what I learned when I was doing the book called The Veil, Women Writers on a History, War, and Politics. It was a bit of a sequel to another book I did, which was a history of Muslim women. But I knew I couldn't do it. It had to be all kinds of people, and I was again trying to contextualize the veil. And all sorts of wonderful things came into me, and I used it basically that book as a guide for creating the show, and then just sort of took it in all those directions and hoped, inshallah, that it would work. You know, I had moments of great doubt. I'm not sure what the question was. I think I got a little lost
your
there.
response is interesting. I mean, I think you did a lot of courage to do it. I mean, some of us were saying that, you go to the exhibition, of course, one thinks exactly what we're talking about. Muslim faith, Muslim culture, the veils in Muslim cultures. And of course, in the exhibition, you're showing other types of veiling, and yet everything we're talking about here focuses on that. And I mean, I can't resist too. My mind's going, oh yeah, all that I've read in the New Yorker, all those articles.
Oh, sure.
And so forth.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering when you were putting it together, did you find like you had to sort of struggle to add other veils from other cultures, or to give them equal weight, or do you find?
Well, I found, there were, it was difficult to find things from other cultures.
Right.
And in fact, the book, but this is, everything's so topical in the world, right, in life. The book actually does have more Islamic veiling than other things, although there are three articles about Judaism, for example, and 2 about Hinduism, and, but in a lot of the, when I found artists themselves, thinking about the veil, they were almost inevitably thinking about the Muslim veil. And I didn't want to do a documentary show, no National Geographic kind of stuff. I mean, you could do that easily, but why? And I can't, I can't get a hold of old work from the Met. They won't let me have it. So there I was. But I wanted to contextualize. That was my point. I didn't want to just focus on the Islamic veil, but I did find that most of the artists who were thinking about the veil were indeed thinking about the Islamic veil, although there were, of course, the Catholics, right? Elizabeth Bisbing, the piece with the veil, the little pictures with the empty faces, and little Betty Jane in the middle. She thinks a lot about her Catholic upbringing, so she's very involved in. And Valerie Jack, who spent time in Miss Abbey, actually near me, in Colorado, has the 3D nun pictures. That wasn't as hard to find, but other aspects of the veil. Eve had, Eve wasn't exactly talking about the veil when I saw her work and thought, oh, this is about the veil, right? Or the piece, the paper piece that was based on a talk I had with a scholar named Margot Badran, who did a biography for the Sharawi, and she was telling me that her first unveiling was on paper, right, when she wrote her memoirs. And that kind of thing sort of sparked my mind to think about how, and the piece on paper also, it's not just any old piece on paper, right? It's translucent. It's a pattern, a dress pattern, and it has that poem about containers of water and small. It's got kind of all those elements. But Tiffany Bessenden, who did that piece when I found it, is a blonde lady, Finnish artist from Minnesota and absolutely no relationship to the veil at all. When I said, I want that for my veil show, she sort of went, huh? Why? And then we had a talk. And, I mean, for me, it's a perfect piece, but it's all in my head, and I have to sort of explain this over and over again.
I think that a piece like that really does a nice job of highlighting what you do in the exhibition, which is not just sort of a literal take on the different cultural and historic meanings of the veil, but also kind of metaphorical